Welcome to Excel Magic Trick number 1330. Hey, if you want to download this Excel file, Excel Magic Trick 1330 Part 1 Start, and there's a Part 2 and a Part 3, meaning there's 3 files. If you want to download those and follow along, click on the link below the video. Hey, we got to see an amazing ability of Excel using Power Query. We want to append all Excel tables in the current workbook into a single table and then make a pivot table report. Now, I have some small tables on each sheet. The quad sheet represents the quad product, and there's date and sales. Carlota represents the date and sales for the Carlota product. And Belen, we have just 2 records here, but those are the transactions for Belen. We need to get all 3 of those tables, stack them on top of each other, and then do whatever we want. Sort, filter, pivot tables. Now, we're actually going to see 3 different ways to do this, and there's 3 different files. Now, part of the reason we're going to see 3 different examples and use 3 different files is that we're actually going to use the Power Query function Excel.CurrentWorkbook. And if we go to Microsoft Help, it says returns tables in the current Excel workbook. Now, if it actually did that, it would be easy. We'd just use this function. We'd get the tables. We'd append them. But what Excel.CurrentWorkbook actually returns is, sure, it returns Excel tables, meaning we've used the Excel table feature to convert our proper data set to an Excel table. It will also return defined names, print ranges, and I didn't test this, but I suspect that perhaps in earlier versions it might return the filtered ranges. I was having trouble figuring out how to do this, and of course our awesome online Excel teammate Bill Sizes at YouTube, Power Query Master, helped me to figure out how Excel.CurrentWorkbook really works. Now, this first file here only has Excel tables in it. This Excel file here does not have defined names, print ranges, or anything else. And we're going to append our tables using a connection only, which means if we only want our pivot table report, we can actually use the append connection only. And it's actually the easiest amongst all of these options. So let's see how to do that. Again, we have our 3 tables, boom, boom, and we need to join them all together and make a pivot table report. I'm going to click in some empty cell, go up to Data, and in Excel 2016, Power Query is Get and Transform. If you're in Excel 2013 or 10, you have to download Power Query and install it as an extra tab. But here it is, Get and Transform, New Query from Other Sources and down to Blank Query. This is where we can actually write our Power Query function. Now, let's come over before we do anything. We want to name this query. And I'm going to call it All Tables. Now, the name of the query is not so important in this first example when we use connection only. But later, it will become really important for proper results. Now, I'm going to come up to the formula bar, equals Excel. Notice I capitalized the first E, but not the rest, dot current workbook. Open parentheses, close parentheses. Now, before I hit Enter, you got to make sure you spell everything correctly. And case matters, capital E, C, and W. Now, watch what happens when I hit Enter for Excel.CurrentWorkbook. It gives me this content column, which actually contains all the data for the tables. We actually can click off to the side, not on the table, and look at a preview down here. So it looks like field names in each one of those records in rows. So that has the content. But look at this column. This has the name, and that is not the name of the sheet. It's actually the name of the table. In our next example, we'll see that this column will list a bunch of names, including defined names and print ranges. For the defined name, it's actually hard to get at it and filter it out if you don't want it. But if you only have Excel tables in your Excel workbook, then we don't have a problem. We know these are all Excel tables. Now, if you've ever used Excel.Workbook function, that actually goes to an external workbook and gets all the objects. If you use Excel.Workbook, not with the current, it actually adds an extra column called kind, which allows us to filter by object, whether it's a table or a defined name. But .current workbook does not do that. For our example, though, we don't need to worry about that because these are all tables. Now, our first step is we need to get rid of that F. This actually has the product name, and I'm going to need this in my final table. So I'm going to click on Name column, come over to Home, Transform, Split, and I want to split by number of characters. My convention here was that the first character was always F for the table. So I'm going to type number of characters 1, and then I do not want repeatedly because that'll split all of the letters into individual columns. I want once as far left as possible. When I click OK, it has split it. I can see over here it is creating steps. It actually transformed the data type for me on this column. I'm going to come over and click the red X to get rid of it. It totally will not hurt our final result at all if you leave it there, but I'm going to click that X to remove that step. Because really, it changed it, and that's unnecessary because all I want to do is right-click Remove. We used Split to get at that F, but then we removed it. Now I'm going to come up to this Expand button because I want to get at the content in the table. So I click Expand. Uncheck Use Original Column Names as Prefix. That actually would combine content and name 2 with these names, and we don't want that. I only want these 2 names. So when I click OK, there it is, Date, Sales, and Name 2. Now, it gives us a preview here of the data type, and the fact that it mixes A, B, C, and 1, 2, 3 means it's not sure what it is, or it's any, and that's not what I want. I want date. So I come over to Transform Group in Home, drop down for data type, and I'm going to select date. And boom, they're dates. Now I select the sales column, come up, data type decimal. This column already guessed right. It's got A, B, C. Double click to rename this. I want to call this product and enter. There's our query name. There's our steps. We can come up, home ribbon, close and load to. And I do not want a table. Now, here's the cool trick here. If I were to load it as a table, which we will do in our next example, it is a table. And so when you refresh, it actually takes the output and doubles the data. So for this first example, we're going to just say only create a connection. Then we don't have the trouble of exporting this as a table and Excel.CurrentWorkbook interpreting it as a table to import upon refresh. Only create a connection. Come down to load. We can see over in our Workbook Queries pane, there's our table. Now, the cool thing about that is it sits there, and we can totally access it if we need to create a pivot table. So I'm going to click in some cell, go up to Insert, Pivot Table, or use the keyboard Alt-N-V. Now, it's confused because I had an empty cell here, but I'm going to say Use an external data source. Choose a connection. And there's our query, all tables. Click Open. So now Create Pivot Table dialog box will see that query. I want this as a new worksheet. Click OK. I immediately want to come down and name this sheet. Double click, and I'm going to call this Month Product Report, and Enter. Now, our pivot table field list is way over here, so I'm going to grab it by the top and drag it over. Pull down the bottom. There are our fields. I'm going to drag date down to the rows. Now watch what happens in Excel 2016 when I drag a daily date. It automatically groups it, and we can see our months here. There's date down here. If I expand this, I can see the days. I do not want the days. I want just the months. So I'm going to click and drag it off. Now I'm going to go up and get product, and I'm going to drag it below months. I can expand June. Now I'm going to drag sales down to values. I have my basic report. I need to get rid of row labels, so I come up to Design, Layout, Report Layout, Show in Tabular. I come to one of the cells in the sales column, right-click, not Format Cells. That would actually format the cells. I want to format the field, so I select Number Formatting. And I can select whichever one I want. I'm going to say currency with no decimals showing. Click OK. So that's my basic pivot table report. Control and roll to zoom in. Now let's go and change the data and add an extra sheet. I'm first going to go to Carlota. And in the last cell, I'm going to type 6/11 tab, and instantly that adds a new record by typing something directly below. And the amount was 689.23. And I'm not going to hit tab because that would add another record. I'm simply going to hit enter. Now let's go over to our pivot table sheet. Somewhere inside the pivot table, I can right-click refresh, and instantly it updates. Actually, that right-click refresh forced our connection-only table to refresh. Now let's see how cool this is. Let's add a new sheet. Right-click, insert new sheet, or you can use the keyboard Shift F11. I'm immediately going to double-click and call this Append. That's the name of the product. Enter. Now I'm going to hit pause. Now I quickly created a table. I named it up here F Append. And now let's go back to our pivot table sheet. Right-click, refresh. And instantly that new table over here on the Append sheet, that new table is completely incorporated into our pivot table report and also, of course, into our query. Now, that was our first example. And sometimes it's not the case that we can use connection only. So our next example, we want to see how to dump it into our sheet, and we will run into a particular problem with current workbook. Now, this file name is part 1. I'm going to close it. I'm in the file name part 2 now. You can see this is the file. Now, here we only have Excel tables, but we want to see how to use Excel.CurrentWorkbook to append our tables and create a new table. And we're going to run into a recursion problem. Now, we have the same 3 tables on the Bellin sheet. This is the Bellin table. But if we go up to Table Tools, Design, Properties, it's not called FBellin. It's called Bellin in this workbook. Carlota tables called Carlota, and Quad tables called Quad. Now, we're going to start on the All Sheets. Whichever cell is selected, we go up to Data, New Query, From Other Sources down to Blank. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to name this table All Tables. Now, whatever you call your query, when you are gathering up all tables to append them one on top of each other, you have to name it and remember what it is. I'm, in fact, going to copy it so I have it stored there. Because we're actually going to have to, in our query, filter out this table. All right, let's go ahead. Up in the formula bar equals Excel.CurrentWorkbook. Open parentheses, close parentheses. Capitalization, spelling correct, and hit Enter. Now notice in this column, remember we only have tables in this workbook. So these are the table names. This table will only show up in our query by mistake after we export it into the workbook. And we're actually going to do that to look at the error. Now I'm going to come to the Content column, click Expand. Uncheck Use Original Column Names as Prefix, click OK. Select the Date column, come up to Date Type, and select Date. Sales, Data Type, Decimal Number. Now we're ready to load this table. So we come up to the Home ribbon, Close and Load to. We want it in a table this time. On this existing sheet, A1 is fine. Click Load. And look at that. It loaded all tables. Now, there's a simple fix for this because we simply go back to our query, and I'm going to come over here, right-click, Edit. And in the name column, we want to filter. So I'm going to click the drop-down, Text Filters, does not equal. And now does not equal, and I'm going to Control-V. There is the table name. Click OK. You would think that Microsoft would have a bit of code built into this feature that would know whatever table is exported from the query shouldn't be included, but that's not the way it is. So we simply have to make sure on this column that we filter out that table name. Now when I close and load, and I can simply click this, it already knows where to go. There's our correct table. Click in a single cell, Alt-N-V, and I want to put it on this existing sheet location. And I'm going to put it right in G1. Click OK. Date down to rows. Drag date off. Now look at that. I totally made an error here. I did not want this to be name. I'm going to come over here. This is beautiful in Power Query. Right-click, Edit. Here's our steps. I'm simply going to come over here, double-click, name it Product, Enter. Click Close and Load. We could see the product name over here has been corrected. We need to correct it here. Right-click, Refresh. And just like that, there is product. That's pretty cool. Whatever output is totally connected to the table and the query, and at any time we can go back and edit. Product down below rows, sales down to values. Expand, right-click. Number formatting to number format the field. Currency, no decimals, click OK. And design, layout, report layout, show in tabular. Now let's go add a new record just like we did before below the Carlota table. This is 6/11 tab. $689.23 and enter. Back to all tables. Right-click and watch what happens here. Right-click, refresh. Didn't update. When you dump the table into the spreadsheet, you have to right-click and refresh this, then right-click and refresh. So one lesson we can learn from this is if we don't need the actual data set, we're just interested in the final report, it's better to actually, like our first example, load it to connection only. But if you want the data here, you have to have 2 refreshes. Now I'm going to do one last thing. I'm going to insert a new sheet, Shift F11, double-click, call this Append, enter, and create my table. Now I hit pause, I created the table, and I made sure to name it. Now I go back to all tables. Right-click, remember it's a double. Right-click, refresh, boom, there it is. Right-click, refresh, boom. Now we're going to do our final example. And in the final example, it will be the most comprehensive or the most robust solution. Now we're in the workbook part 2. I'm going to close it. Now I've opened up the Excel Workbook Part 3. Now this is the name of the file here. And in this file, we have Excel tables, defined names, and print ranges. And so we want to see how to deal with all these objects when we're using Excel.CurrentWorkbook. Now let's take a little tour of this workbook. I'm going to go up to the Define Name dropdown, and look at that. We have a bunch of names. Now some of them are table names like quad, print area, but there's these defined names up here. So I'm going to click on criteria, and guess what? If you're using advanced filter in the workbook that you're trying to do this in, it will always create this define name named criteria. Similarly, if you're extracting to an external area outside the data set, when using advanced filter, it will always create an extract name. Now, I just mentioned that so that if you have advanced filter, because these defined names will be imported if you use Excel.CurrentWorkbook. So if you use advanced filter, you've got to watch out for those. Here's just a defined name. That also will be imported. Then there's a print area, which will also be imported when using Excel.CurrentWorkbook. And by the way, M is for Data Monkey is an awesome Power Query book. Ken Pauls and Miguel Escobar did this, and that's the trick they used to import data using Excel.CurrentWorkbook. They were using print ranges. And then down here, there's our quad table. And watch this. Click the drop-down. What happened to extract, print range, and criteria? Those only show up in the drop-down when you're on the particular sheet. There's the Carlota table. There's the Bellin table. All right, let's see how to do this. Let's go to All Tables. I'm in cell A1, Data, New Query, From Other Sources, and Blank Query. Now check this out. This is the longest keyboard that I use. Alt-A, P-N-O-Q. Yes, I know that's crazy. But if you're really doing this 50 times a week and you teach yourself that keyboard, it is faster than using the mouse. Now, first thing we want to do is we want to come over here and call this All Tables. Enter. Now we come up to the formula bar, equals Excel.CurrentWorkbook. Open parentheses, close parentheses, and hopefully I spelled it right and got the caps right. Enter. Now let's look at this column. Whoa, look at that. There's a filtered list. There's the criteria extract. There's the defined name and print range. Now actually, you can filter and not include ends with filter database, criteria extract, and print range, because those names always follow that convention. But it's the defined name that really gives us trouble. How are we going to filter that out? Remember, as we mentioned earlier, the Excel.Workbook without the current getting data from an external Excel workbook will always add a kind column for us to filter by object. But we don't have that here. Hey, let's go take a look at each one of these objects. Click off to the side, not on the actual name table. There's one of our tables, table. There's an error. There's our criteria. And check that out. It adds a column 1 field name. Extract, same thing. Names, same thing. And even our print range, lots of columns. So if we could extract from all of our tables in a separate column all of the field names, we could filter out the word column. So that's what we're going to do. Now, before we add that extra column, the one thing we can't filter out with that trick is this error here. So this is where we're going to take advantage of the fact that when you filter database always has a name with that text at the end. So I'm going to click the drop down. Text filter does not end with. And hopefully I'll type this right. Filter database. Click OK. Sure enough, that filtered it out and it added a step. Now we want to add that column, so we go up to Add Column, Add Custom Column. I'm going to call this Get Field Names. Now, what do we want to do here? We want to get those field names. I'm going to type the word table dot. Now, there are a bunch of table functions, and you can actually teach yourself. If you go out to Google and type something like Power Query Functions and enter Power Query, formerly known as M Formula Categories, you can click on that. And huge list here. And check that out. There's the table functions. There's the list functions and a bunch of others. I'm going to click on the table functions. Table.add column, table.column count, and there it is, table.column names. So back here, we're going to use one of the table functions, column names. Open parentheses, and content gets us access to each one of these tables for each one of the rows. Now, close parentheses. That's not going to quite work because it's going to give us a bunch of column names. What we really want is to join them all together in a column here. Now, if you know Excel 2016, over in the spreadsheet, we have text join function. Over here, we don't have text join, but we do have text dot combine. So instead of join, they used combine. And that will do it. Open parentheses. There's the text to look through and combine. Just like our text join, we have to give it a delimiter, Text.Combine, comma. So the second argument will be the delimiter in double quotes, comma, space, and double quotes, close parentheses. So there's our extra column using Text.Combine and Table.ColumnNames. Click OK. Wow, check that out. Now that is the trick I learned from Bill Sizes, how to create this extra column. And so now we can simply come over to the filter, does not contain, and I'm going to type column. Now guess what? This is an assumption. This assumes that our proper field names don't have the word column in them. Does not contain column, click OK, instantly filtered out. Now we want to click on Content, hold Shift, click on Name, right-click, remove other columns. Now we can use our Expand button. Unselect Use Original Columns as prefix, click OK. Click on the Date column, and either in Transform or Home, we can click and go to Data Type. I want Date. Sales, Data Type, Decimal Number. It got this one right. There's the ABC icon. Now, the most important step, as we saw last example, we definitely have to filter out the names so that we don't include this table anytime we refresh. Control-C, click the drop-down. Text filters does not equal. And I'm going to Control-V, click OK. Now we're ready to load. Home, close and load. Close and load to. We're dumping this in a table on the existing sheet. A1 is fine. Click Load. And there we go. Let's add a new record. That same record to Carlota. 6-11 tab. 689.23. Enter. Go back to our table. Right-click, refresh. And sure enough, there it is. Now I'm going to add this extra sheet. Shift F11, double click. We're going to call this Aspen, enter, and I'm going to create this table. All right, so I have my Aspen table. There's the name. Come back to all tables, right click, refresh. That is amazing. Wow, that was a pretty epic video. We talked about what to do when you want to use Excel.CurrentWorkbook to access tables. We talked about what to do when the workbook has Excel tables, define names, and print ranges. And we wanted to dump the table into the sheets. In the second example, we only had Excel tables. We talked about the recursion problem and how we had to filter so the name does not include the name of the query and the exported result table. And then we started it off with example 1. If we only had Excel tables, we can use Excel.CurrentWorkbook with a connection only, and then we don't get the recursion trouble. All right, that's a lot of fun with Power Query. We'll see you next video.